And now to Rivers State, a state that is facing one of its most perilous political moments in many years. But is anyone listening to calls for an immediate, essential de-escalation? On the contrary, tough talk remains the order of the day, with supporters on both sides getting more militant and angrier by the day, really angry, and striking terror into the hearts of ordinary people. Both sides are clearly keeping the conflict going, mortgaged by their promise to their followers to destroy their opponents politically once and for all. And with the bad vibes come the increasing possibility that if the attempts at a political and legal solution run into hiccups, the conflict will continue to worsen. And the longer the dispute goes on, the more it turns into playing with the fire of insecurity. A bit like a child with pyromania who relieves anxiety and draws attention by striking another match, lighting another fuse, and then sitting back and watching the pyrotechnics. So how then to quench the flames before they burn out of control? Well, for his assessment of the security situation in Rivers State, I'm joined now in the studio by the international security analyst, certified anti-terrorism specialist and Africa representative of the Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board, David Otto. Great to see you, David.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you very much for coming in. Before we go to Rivers State, because we have the benefit of your experience, from a security point of view, what is your assessment of this issue of the continued incarceration of Nnamdi Kanu and the impact it's having on the level of insecurity in the southeast?
Well, I think, I listened to the Honorable House of Representative member, and I think, one of the key points, they have a very good beginning. But I think what the challenges that they may encounter at this point in time is to be able to demonstrate that, one, if Nnamdi Kanu were released, then it's going to have a positive impact on the level of insecurity in the southeast. So they have to demonstrate that by way of demonstrating some data, or it's not just going to be speculative. But also, in order for them to do that, they also have to demonstrate that before he was incarcerated, there was a lower level of insecurity, which has increased after he was incarcerated. That means if he's then released, there could be potentially a lower level of insecurity. The other hurdle which they have is to demonstrate how Nnamdi Kanu himself, as the key actor, what plans he does have, and if indeed he doesn't face any oppositions, perhaps he may not necessarily have the control which the lawmakers do believe that he does have to be able to influence.
Dampen down the flames,
influence,
as
yes,
it were, yeah.
Dampen down the flames of insecurity in the Northeast. So they have to prove that, from a security point of view, and I think they still haven't done that at this point in time. That is where I believe that they should be heading to. Besides the legal implications in terms of, if 50 of the general representative of the members of the House of Rep is a good representation of 360 members, perhaps.
They say they've now got
yes,
150.
Of course. So
although they haven't all signed
which means there
letter.
could be some opposition within
right.
the members of the House of Reps. So that is something which, if it went to the text of the Commander-in-Chief and the President, he would have to be looking at what are the pros and cons. And I think that's where they actually need to work. They've got a number of areas to work on. It's not a very straightforward matter as it is, but it has to be backed by data.
Sure. I think those are good points. Let's turn to Rivers State. From the point of view of security and insecurity, do alarm bells ring for you when you assess the deepening political crisis in Rivers State?
I think it shouldn't just ring for me, which of course it does. It should ring for the state. It should also ring for the country, and it should ring for the Commander-in-Chief. The scenario which is growing in Rivers State is, can be equivalent to what I describe as a coup within that state. And that is not something that is uncommon within the country, and it could lead to a position where if matters are not de-escalated, what happened in the Second Republic in 1983 in Ondo, what happened in 2015 with Goodluck Jonathan administration as a result of the insecurity in northern Nigeria, in Borno State, which brought down his administration. If matters are not controlled effectively with very strict implementation strategies, what is going to happen is River State is going to potentially lead to the bringing down of the administration, because it is a very critical state. It's described as the main treasure or the foundation, the treasure of the state in terms of its wealth. So if you look at the 5 indices that lead to general insecurity, they are all present. You've got the motivational factor. There is a huge interest by respective actors, to stick to their guns in terms of what they want to achieve, from a self-interest point of view. That's one, the motivational factor. River State has a very high level of small and light weapons, and potentially what could happen is both sides could arm each other. And that brings in the second indices, which is the capabilities. Then you have the opportunity which has already arisen, where you have local government chairmen being replaced, their secretary has been blocked, that leading to escalation. You have the main actors, which is the fourth indice, ensuring that no one wants to give way. Then the fifth indice, which is very critical, is the fact that you have a scenario where violence has already kicked in, and there seems to be a high level of young people that have no employment, where the economy of the country is struggling, we are facing hyperinflation, everyone is vulnerable. That itself, that fifth indice will create a perfect scenario for a general insecurity. So what is happening in River State now, if it's not addressed immediately by the Commander-in-Chief, it may lead to what we do not deserve for the country.
Yeah, that's a very interesting analysis. And beyond the Commander-in-Chief, just on the River State level, I mean, you've been following both sides of the argument. Has either side been, in your assessment, expressing enough concerns about the security risks that you just outlined as a result of their ongoing rift and as it continues to worsen?
Well, of course, the Chief Security Officer of the state, who is the governor, has talked about the level of risk that the state does face, at this point in time, because of course that's his responsibility. But what he faces is a scenario whereby you have, in the colonial days, godfathers bringing in godsons, and when they do disobey, issues of what the godfather does want, it leads to a scenario where you have the state split in the middle. So you have a situation where perhaps even the commander, the chief security officer of the state, who is the governor, does not know who to trust and who to give responsibilities that will favor the security of the state. So it's a very chaotic environment. I think what we haven't seen in River State, which could have happened, Charles, is if, for example, you had state police whereby the governors, were in charge of the police, you would see officers killing each other because they belong to one side or the other, or men in uniform storming the state house and saying, we have taken over the state. That would have happened.
That's a very worrying
in a scenario where you had state police. So this is one of the issues why some analysts have argued that giving authority to the chief security officer to control. The country
is still politically immature.
Yes.
And if you gave it to them,
it would
inflame situations.
Yes, but at this point in time, what has stopped that from happening is because you still have the chief security officers, or what you call the security chiefs in Abuja, controlling the activities of their representatives in each state. So that is the good news. But what is going on now, if it is not addressed, is going to lead to...
So basically, in your assessment, the rhetoric, the saber rattling between the two sides seems to be building inevitably towards a violent confrontation if it's not addressed. And obviously, violence crosses a red line.
Of course.
When there is clearly a threat of security, and your sense is that is where the federal government comes in, or now is where the federal government comes in?
Now is where the federal government comes in. The environment is already fertile, and it does appear.
Well, how do they come in? Because some people are calling for a state of emergency.
Well, I think, if you call for a state of emergency at this point in time, you've got to give an argument that a state of emergency is going to bring about peace and stability. I think, we haven't gotten to that stage, the bonus state, where you would call for a state of emergency. I think what we could potentially be looking at is to call for restraint from both sides or all sides, depending on how many sides do exist. It has come to a point, Charles, where it is now trickling down to the most dangerous segment of the state, which is the local government. Once you begin to divide the local population, for example, by saying we are for XYZ chairman and these other people are for XYZ chairman, that is the most dangerous part of it. So you've moved away from the strategic level, which is maybe the ugas at the top, as you call it, having disagreements, to a point where you're dividing the population in the middle, and that is where the danger lies.
That is very, very illuminating. So we're going to have to be watching that line very closely to be sure that nobody crosses the line. Do you think this conflict is going to continue to rage even after the appeals court decides this latest round of the disagreement? Because, part of what is keeping everybody calm is the fact that this is in court and people are waiting to hear what's going to happen.
The fact is that there is a lot to lose. I mentioned to you the motivational factor. Rivers State is a very critical state, and it is very rich, and the interest of each party is something that is going to be very difficult to either satisfy or set aside. So even if there is a declaration of the appeals court judgment, it will still leave one side or the other, both sides cannot win. There must be a winner. And potentially, whoever loses, has maybe half of the population or maybe half of the support. You don't know. So the situation that we're facing now is not an either-or scenario. I think what we're looking for here is a very powerful reconciliation committee, or whatever you want to call it, to get to a point where justice can prevail. We shouldn't have a democratic system in courts where selection takes precedence over elections.
Yeah, but that's a good point on the local government level. But is there anything at all that gives you hope about that situation on the sort of governor's level? For instance, some people have said that this conflict appears to be strengthening the confidence of Governor Fubara, which they say can only be good for the further consolidation of democracy in Rivers State, because he's the elected governor.
Well, the thing is, when it comes to how people, become governors, again, as I mentioned to you, it's something that it's strictly in the dark. All parties know the truth. It's those in the middle that, are set on fire. So whether it strengthens the current governor's position, that has an impact of weakening whoever is opposing the current governor. So what we're looking for, Charles, is a safe face scenario, because the most.
You mean for the other side?
Yes,
because the governor is the democratically.
Of course, he's the democratically elected
person.
Yeah. But because we want peace rather than leaving a huge part of the community divided or aggrieved, we need to still find a safe face scenario.
And if that does not happen,
yes.
Because you're an international security analyst. You've analyzed things from Mali to Gaza to all of that. If that doesn't happen, in your assessment, it represents how quickly a political situation can deteriorate into a potentially explosive case of insecurity?
I think, what we're facing now is, there is what you see on the surface, which is the political argument. Then there is also what you don't see in the background, which is the what you call the militancy aspect of it. And what does that mean in simple terms? There will be preparations going on should there be a disagreement where arms, could, become the way out.
And we've already seen some of these people turn up with arms.
Yes, and the bad news, with River State is that it's a very vulnerable state with the riverine areas, very classic area for international or regional terrorist groups to harbor and take advantage of the scenario. So we're facing a scenario which is not just, potentially going to impact the riverine people, but it's a scenario that is going to have a devastating or potentially devastating impact.
Right. So
in
terms of trying to find a solution and to move the dial in a positive direction, is it about the police showing massive force? Is it about dialogue? Is it a combination of the two?
I think it's a multi-dimensional approach.
Right.
Right now, everything seems to be in chaos. But I think, what you need to do is to, what you call, go back to the last known good. And that could potentially mean getting mediators who might have some level of trust still left.
But the president intervened. I mean, you couldn't get higher than that.
Well, of course, Charles, you've got to understand that there are also political implications. You're talking about a state that is, majority PDP. The president is from another party. So the question of who benefits, from the current scenario is one that you cannot forget, to remember when you're making this analysis. So it's not just about how the president intervenes, but it's got to be, how the people view his intervention. As one, that it is for the benefit of the riverine state, of River State, and it is for the benefit of
there's no political motivation. And there's no political
motivation. Partisan motivation that is going to set the state, divide the state in the middle.
Right. Yeah. So without that dialogue, the people of River State, who are already living precariously, will continue to be held hostage by this crisis, and inevitably, the more granular the political crisis gets, the more many of them will start taking the law into their hands. As you said, it going down to that local government level, as they feel more threatened by the crisis.
Yes, because there are several levels of interest. And in order to solve this kind of a crisis, you've got to be able to pay attention to those interests. The interest of the guys at the top has a direct impact of those at the bottom. So the governor needs to have control of the state. He possibly would see himself as on seat and perhaps not in power. So he wants both, because that's the right that he's been given. But it's not an easy situation. But my concern, Charles, always is you need to have at this point in time, an intervention that will not put any party in a position where they cannot save face. Without that, we're in trouble.
David, fascinating talking with you as always. David Otto is an international security analyst, certified anti-terrorism specialist, and Africa representative of the Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.